when I was in seminary, I had a part-time job at Woodward's selling vacuum cleaners, among other things. I was the only person at seminary who could literally say, "My job sucks." And one of my co-workers at Woodward's was a Jehovah's Witness. And when I first met him and learned that, all my stereotypes and prejudices came into view. The whole blood transfusion thing, the pushy knocks on the door, no Halloween, no Christmas, and so on, to name a few. But surprisingly, they didn't swear with the makeup of this fellow as I got to know him. He was respectful, kind, good-humored, good company, hardworking, and so on. And so after some time, despite my prejudices, I grudgingly came to respect him for his faith, because it had obviously played a big part in his life. But then one coffee break, we were talking about religion and so on, and I, for some reason, felt compelled to ask him, "You really don't think my faith is legitimate, do you?" And he took a couple of moments and said, "Sorry, but no, I don't." And the conversation stopped, and indeed our friendship kind of waned after that. He wasn't willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, even when I reached a point where I could do that for him. And what I learned from that is how important mutual respect is between people of faith, different faiths, particularly when you're the one that's on the other end of the judgment and the prejudice. I remember this as I read the Acts passage that Pat wrote today. Here Paul is addressing an audience in Athens, a very sophisticated audience made up of Greek, Roman scholars, philosophers, teachers, thinkers, and so on. And he shows them a respect that we don't see elsewhere in the New Testament. He notes the sculptors and the idols that are around the place where he's speaking. In particular, one idol that says the unknown God. And he seems to use that word, unknown God, as kind of a pretext for inviting himself to tell them what he knows about God, and so on. But then he goes on to describe his faith. But interestingly, he uses a lot of themes and ideas that were already circulating amongst the audience in that culture. They weren't new. For instance, that idea of God in whom we move and have our being. That was borrowed from a Greek poet. So it's rather surprising, the attack that he takes. It's very respectful. And and then he did refer to Jesus, but only at the end, and almost in passing. He talks about Jesus as God's appointed man. So this is all very fascinating. Even Paul, in this particular context, shows people of other faiths a certain respect. Well, recently, you all know that I take Tai Chi religiously now. It's had such a benefit on my health. And one of my Tai Chi instructors described Master Moy, who was the founder of the Tai Chi practice that we do. And one day Master Moy said, "If you have another tradition that you follow, do more. If you also do Tai Chi, do more. And by doing more, you will make strong your other tradition." Well, this just blew me away. Not only respecting another faith, another religion, but doing your exercise, your practice, your devotion to Tai Chi as a way of strengthening that, not taking it away. Yeah. In this case, now this isn't what Paul is saying, this type of respect. Paul still ultimately wants to convert these people to Christ. Maybe this is a way of candy coating it or setting it up so he can do that. I'm not presuming to say that this is what the Scripture says today. But perhaps we've reached a point in our history, the 20 centuries, the bloody, fractious, violent, intolerant centuries that has been seen in the Christian church. Perhaps we're now at a stage when we can see respect and interface through Jesus' admonition to love your neighbor, to love your enemies. It is important to realize when I say this, to love your enemies, how hard this is. And I'm aware of how hard it is. It's nigh impossible. But it is an ideal, I think, that we need to work towards. With this in mind, do you remember the movie Gandhi? And at the end of the movie, just after the independence of India and Pakistan has been achieved, Gandhi goes on a hunger strike to end the violence between the Muslims and the Hindus. And he's almost dead, but the violence does come down. And then there's a man that's ushered into Gandhi's presence. He's very distraught, tears coming down his eyes. And he confesses to Gandhi that he has murdered a Muslim boy in retaliation for the Muslims murdering his boy. And he says, I'm going to hell anyway, but I don't want your death on my conscience too. And then Gandhi kind of props himself up with a twinkle in his eye and he says, I know the way out of hell. I want you to find a Muslim boy who has no parents, take him and bring him into your home and raise him as your son. And then raise him as a Muslim. Isn't that fascinating? Raise him as a Muslim. This wonderful dialogue reminds us of how difficult loving our enemies can be. But hard as it is, perhaps love is our only way out of hell, at least the one here on earth. And perhaps it is only achieved through God's grace. We can only do this, or even approach it, through God's grace. With this in mind, I want to turn to the two words in the bulletin, but for. I was first introduced to the power of these two little words while I was studying torts in law school, torts being civil lawsuits and litigation and so on. And I was amazed at how these two very innocuous words can change everything in such a brief manner. For instance, I want you to imagine a judge in her reasons for judgment saying this: the defendant is guilty of trespassing on the plaintiff's property, but for the plaintiff's acquiescence in the repeated and regular incursions onto his land by the defendant. Now, this is an old common law principle that goes way back. But you see how those words, but for, you're going one way, he's guilty, but for, and suddenly everything changes. One principle, one reality, and we suddenly see the opposite. And we see the principle behind this but-for idea throughout Scriptures. And one of my favorite places is in the 23rd Psalm that we read earlier. And that verse that goes, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. And if I can paraphrase it, the psalmist said, I would fearfully walk through the shadowy depth of the valley, but for you are with me. I'm afraid to do this, but I have you with me, and therefore I can. And we see this idea in all kinds of places in the Scriptures, where it's going one way, and then suddenly Jesus says something, or someone else, and it's a totally different perspective that we're drawn into. And perhaps it is only through God's but for, God's redemptive grace of our lives, the transformation when we were going one way and then suddenly it changes, our faith changes us, and that changes everything. Well, with this in mind, I wanted to share with you a song that Irene and I have been working on, and it's just about finished, and it's called But For. It's sort of my experience. As you know, I've had some pretty profound changes in my own life and health over the last year or so, and it kind of reflects that.
To